Shalom, welcome. This is TV7's Editor's Note. I'm Jonathan Hessen, and in today's edition, we have a very special guest, a dear friend, Marshal Billingslea, who formerly served as Deputy Secretary of NATO, an Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for countering terror financing, a long list of other positions, currently a Senior Fellow at Hudson Institute. It's great to see you, Marshal.
Great to be with you, Jonathan.
Our discussion has long been in the making. We have been discussing different topics, and you've, of course, been both on Deep Dive as well as on other programs, sharing your knowledge on the latest. But today we have a one-on-one and a great opportunity to really dive into a list of issues that I think that your expertise is one of a kind in this. We'll touch a little bit on Iran, a little bit on Russia, also on a regional perspective of the various smuggling routes, and, you know, as everybody always says, follow the money, and who is better to follow it than yours truly, Mr. Billingslea. So it's really a pleasure. Let's start with the last meeting that was held actually between President Trump and his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin. Putin has, of course, launched a war of aggression against Ukraine, has been really doing his best, his utmost to conquer Ukraine. A country which in literal terms is translated into borderlands, but nonetheless has been standing and fighting back and pushing back on the Russian malign aspirations. How do you see the meeting actually come about, and the subsequent meeting also with Volodymyr Zelensky and the European leaders, in which the true face of Russia has truly been showcased?
I think the meeting in Alaska was a significant and positive step forward and could really only have been achieved by President Trump. The administration clearly, at the time, believed that they had gained some significant ground in discussions with the Russians over Ukraine's territorial integrity and over Russian acquiescence to the idea that there would be some form of NATO-like Article 5 security guarantees. Unfortunately, in the following days, it does appear that Russia has significantly backtracked with statements by the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, statements by others indicating that there was neither an agreement to concrete security guarantees, nor was there a real genuine willingness to sit down and negotiate an end to the conflict with the Ukrainians. So that's unfortunate, and that's a significant degree of backtracking by the Russians. We'll see if they continue to stonewall the president and to, as he has warned, if they try to tap him along, there will be significant consequences. We've been waiting for those consequences, for some time now. There have been these rolling 2-week deadlines that have been issued and retracted and issued and retracted. But perhaps in this next week, if Putin continues to refuse, continues to kill Ukrainians, continues to engage in atrocities in his brutal invasion of Ukraine, then I do believe the president will take decisive action finally against the Russian economy. There haven't been any sanctions imposed by the United States under this Trump administration so far, but he has a wide range of tools in the toolkit that, should he choose to employ them, would have devastating consequences on Vladimir Putin's economy and his war machine.
Let's expand on this briefly, since you published quite an elaborate set of options from a sanctions perspective on your X account. It went viral, to say the least, and received a lot of attention. by both the general public as well as practitioners, including colleagues in the Trump administration. Give us a little bit of the headlines. What would you do in this context?
Really, there's only two things that need to be done to bring the Russian economy to a shuddering halt. The first is that you need to go after the primary thing that they sell that brings hard currency into the country, and that's oil. So you need to target Russian oil exports, which is something that the United States under the Biden administration has refused to do. And the European Union has only imposed a very flimsy, ineffectual price cap, which really has done nothing to tamp down on the hard currency generation of the Russian regime. The Russians are bringing in around $600 million a day in oil exports, and they're principally selling to the Chinese and the Indians. President Trump did threaten tariffs on India if they continued to buy Russian oil, which is, I think, what spooked Vladimir Putin and drove him to the Alaska summit meeting. Those tariffs have, I believe, not yet been imposed. They should be. Additional tariffs should be imposed on the Chinese if they continue to buy Russian oil. But in general, we should be sanctioning any entity that is purchasing Russian crude oil. The other thing you have to do, I mentioned two, the other thing you do is you finally sanction all of the remaining 20% of the Russian banks that Joe Biden refused to sanction. And in so doing, you verify with the Europeans that those banks have been cut out of the SWIFT banking system, which means that they're no longer able to process the oil transactions, which you're also at the same time simultaneously targeting. You do those two things, and within a few months, the Russian economy begins to seize up. There are other things you can do and should do, but those are the two core elements, the banks and the oil.
Absolutely. President Vladimir Putin, in a couple of interviews, has mentioned that Peter the First, it took him roughly 17 years to take over Ukraine, so he still has time, as he put it. When we're talking about those indications, it doesn't seem like Moscow will stop unless, as Napoleon used to say about his troops, the army moves based on the food in their bellies. So, indeed, those type of sanctions and additional pressure may cause that paradigm shift necessary to bring an on to all of that slaughter and belligerent activities by the Russians against the Ukrainians. Now, let's broaden the scope a little bit because it seems like the Islamic Republic of Iran is somewhat frustrated with Moscow. It has indicated, despite mentioning publicly time and again, that Moscow and Tehran have a unique relationship of common respect and other type of rhetoric that goes in that same line. Nonetheless, when we're talking about Iranian hopes to gain once again Russian surface to air capabilities, Moscow has rejected that request, forcing the Iranians to plead with the Chinese instead. And all in all, there were some allegations circulating in Tehran in which they claimed that Russia was the one providing Israel with some of the targeting information with regard to the surface to air capabilities in the vicinity of the nuclear installations. Now, they claim that that had to do also with corruption, but nonetheless, it seems like there is some type of discord between those two allies. Is that something that can be capitalized upon?
Well, the Russians and the Iranians have a lot in common. They're both countries run by murderous thugs who basically sit atop a gas station. In the case of Russia, they are a nuclear armed third world gas station. In the case of Iran, it's been made crystal clear that they will never become nuclear armed. And the decisive action that the state of Israel took, together with what President Trump did with the B 2 bombers to those nuclear facilities, has made crystal clear to the Iranians that they will not be allowed to pursue further uranium enrichment and they will never have a nuclear weapons program. These are positive developments. Russia, of course, has done very little to lift a finger to help its thuggish ally, and I'm sure that is irritating the Iranians to a very high degree. Moreover, the Russians, who will soon assume presidency of the UN Security Council, will be put in the awkward position of having to forward the snapback of UN sanctions once that is finally requested by our European allies. And my hope is that those allies, the so-called E3, the Germans, the French, and the British, that they move sooner rather than later to trigger the snapback of UN sanctions. There's a 30-day clock. It can't be vetoed and it can't be stopped. In fact, the veto would be on any resolution to disapprove the return of the sanctions, and the U.S., the French, and the British are well positioned to exercise such a veto. So the reimposition of UN sanctions on Iran, given that they continue to stonewall the International Atomic Energy Agency, they refuse to allow the IAEA to inspect sites as they're obliged to do under their nuclear nonproliferation treaty obligations, and they clearly continue to harbor nuclear weapons ambitions. And so once these sanctions are reimposed, the mullahs in Tehran will, I think, begin to feel significant effects from those measures.
Well, if we listen to what the Iranians have been saying, including today by the Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman, that they are quite concerned over those latest developments. The E3, as you mentioned, Berlin, Paris, and London, have set a deadline for August 31st for the Iranians to reinvigorate some type of a diplomatic discord. But it seems like they're not necessarily inclined to do so within the Ayatollah regime. And just now, there were reports earlier today that Rafael Grossi, the IAEA Director General, has been under 24-hour security arrangements in light of concrete threats by the Ayatollah regime about potentially harming him. So it seems like they are both concerned but also on the offensive when we're talking about those type of threats. Now, Grossi has mentioned that just today, actually, in an interview at Fox News, that the first team of the IAEA inspectors is back in Iran, and that they are about to restart inspections. But nonetheless, he did point out that many of the facilities were attacked by Israel. Some were not. Of course, the ones that did not have military dimensions to them. But they're trying to figure out the practical modalities on scrutiny. Is there a capacity to exercise any of those types of modalities without any type of political will in Tehran at this moment in time?
Well, the Iranians are stringing everyone along, much as the Russians are in the case of Ukraine. By the way, I don't know that either of those two dictators have 17 years left in their gas tank, but let's see. I think that in the case of Iran, the IAEA needs complete and unfettered access. They need to be able to visit sites that they were prohibited from visiting under the terrible JCPOA agreement negotiated by Barack Obama, which basically exempted from inspection a large number of 20 plus military sites. As you mentioned, some of those sites were struck, some were not. The IAEA is going to need access to those sites. They'll need access to the Fordo and Natanz sites, which were hit, where the Iranians have been periodically trying to dig out those tunnels, presumably because they're trying to retrieve whatever remains of the highly enriched uranium that's buried down in those facilities. So the IAEA needs to be allowed to do their job. They need to be allowed to do their job under the additional protocol of the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty that I mentioned. That is an anytime, anywhere, unrestricted inspection right that Iran has previously committed and violated to provide. But I'll tell you, in the absence of anything concrete, the snapback of the UN sanctions is the most important thing, and we should stop delaying on that.
Earlier this week, we heard Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, during an address to his ardent followers, highlight the necessity that the paths to the Zionist regime, as he put it, from which it is getting help through, must be blocked. The Iranian proxy Ansar Allah, dominated by the Houthi tribe, is receiving a lot of support from the Iranians and continuing to receive that type of support. And just this morning, me, myself, my wife, and boys had to rush into a bomb shelter in light of a ballistic missile being launched out of Yemen. The Yemenis continue to block the strategic strait of Bab el Mandeb. We have spoken about this issue on multiple occasions, but what bothers me most and concerns me most is the fact that the targeting data and some of the sophisticated types of munitions are actually provided for by the Chinese, who are utilizing this theater as a case study for future theaters in the Pacific, potentially, and elsewhere. Uh, why is the United States not more vigorous in its approach with regard to this issue? I mean, just last week, we heard Dr. Sebastian Golka at Hudson Institute speaking with our colleague Dr. Mike Duran about the fact that they view the engagement against the Houthis as a victory or a success. I have a hard time characterizing it as such.
Well, I think if you compare it to the previous US administration, which came into office and immediately removed the terrorism designation of the Houthis that we had put on them, and then systematically refused to enforce the maximum economic pressure sanctions on the Iranians, which then led to the Iranians increasing their own oil exports to China 7 times. They were raking money, still are, not as much now with the reimposition of the sanctions, but they were raking money in from the Chinese. The Chinese, as you mentioned, have been playing a spoiler role really around the world. They've been playing a spoiler role with regard to Ukraine by allowing all kinds of export controlled commodities, including technology that should never be sold to the Russians by the EU's own standard, but which European Union countries are selling to the Chinese as that then gets re-exported back into Ukraine for the war machine. As you mentioned, they're playing a spoiler in the Middle East, not just with what they're doing with the Houthis, but by their brokering normalization agreements and so on and so forth, which really are all simply designed to ensure the unfettered flow of petroleum to China, particularly in the event when they choose to invade Taiwan. And of course, the Chinese aggression in Asia is very significant when you look at what they're doing in the Philippines, how they've been attacking Philippine Coast Guard vessels and attempting to ram them, even causing two of their own ships to collide, their paramilitary so-called Coast Guard colliding with one of their destroyers. So this is a country, this is a communist regime that is behaving very, very irresponsibly and aggressively. And I know that that is first and foremost on the national security minds of the Trump administration.
Absolutely. Well, as I stated, it's a case study for the Chinese. They are also currently, according to a number of individuals, including our friend and colleague who comes here quite often on our shows, Brigadier General in Reserve Dr. Amnon Sofrin, formerly the Chief of Intelligence of Mossad, has mentioned time and again that the Chinese are delivering surface-to-air capabilities to the Iranians at this point in time, and the 80,000 components of dual-use capabilities that were delivered prior to Israel's Operation Rising Lion and America's Operation Midnight Hammer were actually a trigger for the attack on Iranian infrastructure to include nuclear and ballistic missile installations. Now, we don't have very much time left, and I'd like to ask you in the context of Iran's continued support for its various proxies in the region. It has been quite vigorously trying to somehow smuggle munitions through Syria via Iraq, of course, into Syria, and then from there to Lebanon to back or rearm its proxy in Lebanon, Hezbollah. Many of those trucks have been prevented. I'm sure that some of them have managed to reach their destinations. But nonetheless, it seems like the Iranians, despite really hurting on the economic front with a free fall of the Iranian rial, seem to be still quite happy to allow the cash to flow when it comes to his proxies?
They really have no other option because outside of the so-called Russian friend of theirs, which has done nothing really to help them, all they've got are these proxy terrorist groups. And those terrorist groups have been dealt a devastating blow by the state of Israel in the last 2 years, Hezbollah in particular. So it makes sense that the Iranian regime would, to the best of their ability, continue to try to flow whatever meager resources, whether we're talking about cash or we're talking about weapons, to try to keep these terror groups afloat. Because, of course, the purpose of these terrorist groups is not just to threaten the state of Israel, but it's to destabilize the governments and the territories where they reside. And so this was the goal of Hezbollah, was to neutralize Lebanese democracy. This is the goal of the terror, the paramilitary groups that they fund in Iraq, to paralyze the democracy of the Iraqi government. This was their goal in propping up Assad, of course, as a full proxy of the regime. But they wanted that entire territorial arc that stretched from Iran through Iraq, through Syria, down to Lebanon and Israel. They wanted that intact so that they could continue to funnel both guns and money to their terrorists. That's been broken by the Israelis. The Israeli government needs to keep the pressure up, as does the United States. And when we see these transfers, they need to be interdicted or struck.
Let's dive even deeper and go back into memory lane. In 2014, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of the Islamic Republic, declared in a 9 point of answers, or 9 answers to the question of why to annihilate Israel. He said on one of his points that the so-called West Bank, Judea and Samaria, the Jordan Valley, are the most important in the quest to annihilate Israel, and therefore all Muslim nations and the so-called axis of resistance need to flood this territory with both weapons and cash and other type of assistance, just as they're doing and have been doing back then in the Gaza Strip in support of the Islamist Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and others. Now, since then, of course, we had Operation Wavesbreaker, which the IDF launched to counter those activities. The Iranians managed quite effectively to smuggle large sums of money and munitions, both from Lebanon, but also from Syria in particular, through Jordanian territory into those territories. And now that Hezbollah is decapitated under a lot of pressure, alongside the fact that the Assad regime has fallen. Liwa Zainibiyun and Liwa Fatimiyun, including the other Shiite militias, have been driven out, mostly out of Syria into neighboring Iraq, with Hashd Shabi, of course, looking more inward ahead of the U.S. disengagement from that country. Uh, are the Iranians still very vigorous in their efforts to supply those type of weapons and funds into the territories, particularly also to the northern Samaria region, which has been plagued by this phenomena?
Yes, they are. And remember that it doesn't take a great deal of money to launch these kinds of terrorist attacks. But I think a good indication of how active they remain was the operation the IDF undertook yesterday to go after terrorist financiers, I think in Ramallah, who were attempting to move relatively large sums of money for Hamas. So the financiers are still there. They are terrorists, maybe just terrorists who can count into triple digits, but they're terrorists nonetheless. And we need to continue to go after the money movement apparatus that the Iranian regime has largely lost, but not completely lost, with both military strikes as well as a combination of intelligence operations by Israel and the United States, and other friendly nations, and then of course through sanctions.
It seems we don't have very much time left, unfortunately. But in the last 2 minutes, what would you like to speak about? The floor is yours, or the screen is yours, rather.
Yeah, I think the last thing I would offer is the importance of continuing to expand the Abraham Accords. This was a signature achievement of President Trump in his first administration. It was something that people like John Kerry so derisively claimed could never be achieved. But we saw the brokering of peace agreements between the state of Israel and a number of Muslim countries, of Arab countries. That process needs to continue. If for no other reason than I believe the Saudis, the Emiratis, and others understand that the Ayatollah rises in the morning and goes to sleep at night thinking not just about the destruction of the state of Israel, but the destruction of the Gulf Emirates as well, the Gulf kingdoms. They are the next target in line after Israel. They know this, and this is why it's now to the advantage of the Saudis in particular and others to strike these peace deals with the state of Israel, and then to begin to cooperate on Prime Minister Netanyahu's vision for things such as a rail link allowing for the transport of cargo around the Suez Canal, for instance, things that would be highly advantageous to both countries if they could just begin to collaborate within a normalized framework.
Well, the IMAX, so to speak, which will ultimately start in India and reach Europe through Saudi Arabia, Jordan, parts of the Palestinian controlled territories, Israel, and ultimately via Cyprus into Europe. I think it was either Italy or Greece, but this is unfortunately all the time that we have for today. Mr. Marshall Billingslea, a senior fellow at Hudson Institute, and a long list of other positions over the years, not the last ones, I must add. We're looking forward to your return into making a true difference, which is necessary. And we need more minds like yours pushing the right policies forward. Marshall, thank you very much.
Jonathan.
Thank you all at home as well. I am looking forward to seeing you until the next edition of TV7's Editor's Note from me here in Jerusalem. Shalom.
As the geostrategic landscape continues to shift at unprecedented speed, Deep Dive is a weekly update you cannot afford to miss.
There is zero chance that Iran will back away from its terror support.
We have a direct threat against Russian interests.
That's what's at stake. It's not Syria. It's a Middle Eastern order.
Whoever has the most guns, whoever has the most money, the most backing, that's who's going to be in charge.
From Jerusalem to Washington, watch now, Hudson Institute's Deep Dive.